Andrew, time to look at your money. With many interest rates on consumer debt at or near a 40-year high, it now costs consumers a lot more to borrow money. As a result, higher interest rates on credit cards, home mortgages, and auto loans have placed a tremendous strain on many household budgets. But when will interest rates finally start to decline and give Americans some much needed relief? Joining us is our financial expert, Mark Grabacheski with the Quad Cities Investment Group. Good morning.
Morning to you. Happy Monday.
Yeah, same to you. So take us back. Why did interest rates get so high?
Well, the reason interest rates on consumer debt has been rising so high so fast is because the Federal Reserve has been raising what's called the Fed funds rate. Now, the Fed funds rate often serves as a basis for many forms of consumer debt. Think of credit card, bank loans, auto loans, home equity lines of credit, even home mortgages. And as the Fed funds rate is raised, it inherently drives interest rates on those many types of consumer debt higher as well. Now, from February 2022 to July of 2023, the Federal Reserve raised this Fed funds rate from, near 0% all the way up to its current level, a range between 5.25%, 5.5%. By the way, this is the most aggressive pace of interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve in over 40 years. And the reason the Fed funds rate was raised so high, so fast, was to help tap the brakes on this surging inflation we've seen. By raising interest rates, the Federal Reserve makes it more expensive for you to borrow money. You're now being charged a much higher interest rate. And the Federal Reserve hopes that will reduce consumer spending and thus help apply some downward pressure on those consumer prices.
But that begs the question, why has the Federal Reserve kept interest rates high for so long?
It's because this inflation, Devin, again, which started to rise about 3 years ago, has remained stubbornly high. This red dotted line here shows the ideal target rate of inflation of just 2%. Now, granted, inflation has declined from its peak of 8.9% back in June of 2022 to just 3% 12 months later in June of 2023. Currently, inflation within our country is a bit higher at 3.4%. But if you take a deeper dive into this inflation data, you'll see that inflation has become quite embedded within the U.S. economy. And the deeper that inflation becomes embedded within the U.S. economy, the much more difficult it is to get rid of.
Yeah, so when do you think the Federal Reserve will start to lower interest rates?
Well, there was some hope that the Federal Reserve would start lowering interest rates as soon as March, which is literally just a month away. Yeah. But at the Federal Reserve's last meeting on Wednesday, unfortunately, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell came out and quickly ended that hope. Now, the risk of lowering interest rates too soon, too fast, Devin, is that it risks reigniting inflation even higher. By lowering interest rates, it makes it much easier for consumers and businesses to borrow money, and that inherently fuels consumer spending and starts applying that upward pressure on consumer prices, which we certainly don't want to see again. So the latest odds, I think, are that the Federal Reserve starts to lower interest rates, maybe perhaps in June. Either way, though, it's going to be a very slow and gradual process.
All right, well, we appreciate you staying on it. Thank you, Mark.
See you again. Enjoy your week.
You too. And here's a look